All right. Well, we are back to our Wednesday night Bible study, and we welcome everyone to our study this evening. Starting a brand new series. Pastor asked me if I would start this series, so I'm suspending the What We Believe series until we finish this. And this is what we call the Passover series. Jamie did it in adult Sunday school quite some time ago, and but not everyone was present, and then it was not recorded either. So, so we're going to do both. All right. You doing all right back there? Yes, this is, it will show, hopefully in chart form, how that we believe that the crucifixion took place on Wednesday rather than Friday. There is just no way that you can get 3 days and 3 nights from a Friday crucifixion. So, yes. Right. That is correct. Yes. So we're trying to we got substitutes on our technology board. So they're so we're going to wait just a minute or so here, and so she can get the slides to where they need to be. So while that's being done, just ignore the slides on the screen right now. They're working on that back there. So in the meantime, we will go to the passages of Scripture that we will introduce this series for. What I usually do is I take the Old Testament and I go back to the background of the Passover, and I use that as the foundation because that lays the pattern for the crucifixion when Jesus was crucified. So, that being said, we'll get back to Exodus chapter 12 and begin reading with verse number 1. And I will go ahead, they're still working on things back there, so I will go ahead and we will read our scripture verses while they're working on the slides back there. Exodus chapter 12, beginning with verse number 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for a house. And if the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next unto his house take it according to the number of souls. Every man according to his eating shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. Ye shall take it from the sheep or from the goats. and ye shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month. And the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. And they shall take of the blood, strike it on the two side posts and on the upper doorpost of the houses, wherein they shall eat it. And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Eat not of it raw, nor sodden at all with water, but roast with fire, his head with his legs, and with the purtenance thereof. And ye shall let nothing of it remain until the morning, and that which remaineth of it until the morning ye shall burn with fire. And thus shall ye eat it, with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you when I smite the land of Egypt. And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and ye shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. Ye shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. Here's that word memorial, Pastor, we were talking about earlier. 7 days. 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread. Even the first day ye shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eateth unleavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. And in the first day there shall be a holy convocation. And in the 7th day there shall be a holy convocation to you. No manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat. That only may be done with you. And ye shall observe the feast of unleavened bread. For in this selfsame day have I brought your enemies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall ye observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at even, ye shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at even. 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses. For whosoever eateth that which is leavened, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he be a stranger or born in the land. Ye shall eat nothing leavened. In all your habitations shall ye eat unleavened bread. Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel, and said unto them, Draw out and take you a lamb according to your families, and kill the Passover. And ye shall take a bunch of hyssop, and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the two side posts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out at the door of his house until the morning. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians. And when he seeth the blood upon the lintel and upon the two side posts, the Lord will pass over the door, and will not suffer the destroyer to come in unto your houses to smite you. And ye shall observe this thing for an ordinance to thee and to thy sons forever. And it shall come to pass, when ye be come to the land which the Lord will give you, according as he hath promised, that ye shall keep this service. And it shall come to pass, when your children shall say unto you, What mean ye by this service? That ye shall say, It is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians, and delivered our houses. And the people bowed the head and worshipped. And the children of Israel went away, and did as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so did they. And it came to pass that on the midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians. And there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night, and said, Rise up and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go, serve the Lord as ye have said. Also take your flocks and your herds as ye have said, and be gone, and bless me also. And the Egyptians were urgent upon the people, that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, We be all dead men. And the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading troughs being bound up in their clothes upon their shoulders. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses. And they borrowed of the Egyptians jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required. And they spoiled the Egyptians. I'll get it right in a minute. Now, the importance of the Passover ordinance that is introduced in this reading. It's introduced in Israel. It's underscored by the fact that it changed Israel's reckoning of time. It was to mark the beginning of the year for them. Prior to this, the Hebrew year began with the autumnal equinox. The month Tishri, October. That was their beginning before this, beginning of their new year. But from this point on, the year was to begin with Abib, April, and it's also known as Nisan. I prefer Nisan. It seems like Nisan is used, well, they're both used back and forth interchangeably, but I prefer Nisan for just my own reckonings. God gave precise instructions for this ceremony, which was to become a perpetual ordinance in Israel. Each provision had symbolic meaning which related to God's plan of redemption. Now, I'm not going to cover the symbolic meaning in this message, because I'm simply laying the groundwork for what will happen in the New Testament concerning Jesus. The lamb must be of the first year. Then according to the house of their fathers, literally for a father's house, or in other words, a family. Too little for a lamb, or too few to eat the meal at a sitting. In this instance, the meal should be shared with a neighbor. The meal must be prepared with consideration for the number likely to eat. Without blemish, the lamb must not be lame, sick, or marred in any way. The law later stated in Leviticus 22 and verses 20 through 25, it expressly forbade any blemished animals for sacrifice. This provision typifies the Lamb of God, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, according to Hebrews 7:26, and who is the Lamb without blemish and without spot, 1 Peter 1:19. The lamb was to be pinned up from the 10th day to the 14th day, to give time to observe it carefully to determine that it had no blemish. The whole of Israel, all Israel, or the whole assembly, all Israel, was to partake of this rite. The lamb was to be slain, its blood caught in a basin, according to verse 22, and then sprinkled on the upper doorpost or lintel and the two side posts or door frames. According to 2 Samuel chapter 2, verses 14 and 15, the Hebrews commonly boiled the meat of sacrificial meals. The Paschal, or in other words, the Passover, the Paschal meal was to be roasted, which was simpler and quicker than boiling. Since haste was essential, this was the best way to prepare the meat. The Paschal meal was to be eaten with bitter herbs or vegetables, a picture of the bitterness of Israel's servitude in Egypt. Jewish tradition says that chicory, endive, wild lettuce, and nettles were included in this. The Paschal lamb was to be eaten in its entirety. It was to be completely eaten. And you notice when we read through the verses, anything left over was to be burned with fire. There was nothing to be left in evidence, in other words. Now, the word pertinences denotes the intestines. Jewish tradition says the intestines were removed, washed, and cleansed, then replaced to be roasted and eaten. We might say, ugh, but it probably was not that bad. The lamb was to be totally consumed the night of the Paschal feast. Nothing was to be left until the morning. As I said, if there was anything that was uneaten, it was to be burned with fire. The people were to eat the Paschal meal fully clothed and ready for traveling. Their staff was to be in hand. You know what the staff was? Remember? The big long staff that the majority of them would carry. Their staff was to be in hand. They were to have their shoes on their feet. Now, this was unusual, for shoes were normally not worn indoors. The Jamaicans are a whole lot like that. They'll pull their shoes off at the door. And Japanese are that way as well, yes. Jehovah promised to pass through the land of Egypt that night. Now, I want to pause here. Some will say the death angel. No, it was Jehovah. And if you'll notice in the scriptures that we read, the word Lord in all caps was used. That refers to Jesus. Jehovah as well refers to Jesus. All right? When he saw the blood applied as instructed, he would pass over that house. Consequently, the name the Passover. But in that house where the blood was not applied, the firstborn would die. There was a judgment upon Egypt and its gods. Many of these gods were represented by certain animals. Now, partial list of the animals and gods to whom they were sacred: sheep to Kenef, goats to Kehim, cows to Athor, cats to Pashta, dogs to Anubis, lions to Horus, crocodiles to Set, frogs to Hika. Now, if you remember, majority of these were directly hit by the plagues that God brought upon Israel. Yes, yes, they did. There was even a fly. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. These are, like I said, this is a partial list. This is not a list of all the gods that the Egyptians worshiped. So this is just part of them. The Egyptians would consider the wholesale slaughter of animals as a blow to the gods they represented. More importantly, Pharaoh was regarded as a deity, son of Re. Many of these gods are represented by certain animal. I went back up the upper paragraph. His firstborn, Pharaoh's firstborn son, was his heir, and he was regarded as a god. This would make his death the more significant as a stroke of Jehovah against Egypt's gods. I'll get it right in a minute. The Passover was thus established to be an ordinance forever in all future generations of Israel. It was to be observed annually at the stated time. It was a memorial ordinance, a constant reminder to future generations of Israel's deliverance from Egypt by the mighty power of Jehovah. There was another memorial set when, at the end of the 40 years of wandering, they crossed the river Jordan. They built a memorial there. Those memorial stones, yes. Additional conditions were added to this ordinance for its future observation. It was to be the beginning of a week-long solemn festival. The week was to be a holy convocation or assembly. Because of their special use, they are sometimes called high Sabbaths. Now, in our lesson this evening, the Feast of Unleavened Bread is not established as yet. The Feast of Unleavened Bread was added later with the construction of the tabernacle and all of that. All right? All leaven was forbidden throughout Israel during the week. Any violation would result in immediate expulsion from the congregation. Leaven typifies sin throughout the Scriptures. Anytime the word leaven is used in the Scriptures, it refers to sin. Once we get out of Exodus here. The prohibition regarding leavening included not only bread, but also leavening of any kind, The time included in this was 1 week, from the 14th day to the 21st day of Abib or Nisan. Stranger includes those who had become proselytes. Those were Gentiles who accepted Israel's God, embraced Israel's law and worship, and thus became beneficiaries of Israel's covenants. It is significant that God did not exclude Gentiles from the benefits of His gracious covenants. I encourage you to look at Genesis 12:3 later. There are many references in the law to proselytes, and we have some references in Exodus 20 and chapter 20, chapter 23, Leviticus chapter 17, and chapter 24, Numbers 35, Deuteronomy 5, and there are many more. That et al means more. One I can call to mind right at the moment was the lady that was in Jericho, Rahab. She was a Gentile. And she and her whole family became proselytes. I'll give you another example. Ruth. Yes, Ruth. Ruth and Naomi. Ruth was a Moabite. Thank you. A Moabite. She figured into, and Rahab figured into, the lineage of Jesus. Okay? Gentile women. This is significant because God intended His plan of salvation to encompass all peoples, not just the Jews. Born in the land refers to a native-born Israelite. And I'll wait just a minute so you can get that, because the very first word of the next paragraph, habitations, refers to the homes of the Israelites in whatever country they dwelt. This includes Egypt, Palestine, Babylon, Assyria, Persia, or wherever their journeyings might take them. Orthodox Jews observe the Passover today, wherever they live. Mm-hmm. Yes. Moses relayed Jehovah's instructions regarding the Passover to the elders of Israel. Two conditions are included in these instructions, which are not in the record of God's message to Moses. Now, just because God didn't say this doesn't mean that it was wrong. What Moses is doing here is giving them the practical application of God's instructions. All right? God said to slay the lamb, catch the blood in the basin, and put it on the doorpost and the top. Moses gave them two different instructions. Okay? Practical usage here. The use of hyssop to apply the lamb's blood to the door. God didn't tell them how to do it. He just said do it. And number two, the provision that all Israelites were to remain inside their houses on that night. Now, Moses is very precise in his demand that the significance of the Passover was to be communicated from one generation to the next. This shows the necessity of parental instruction to children in order to perpetuate the true message of God. It is significant that truth is only one generation away from perishing from the earth. One generation. That's all it would take. The 10th and final stroke, or plague, fell as Moses had prophesied. It came at midnight. It reached from Pharaoh's palace to the prisoner in the dungeon and the maidservant behind the mill, Exodus 11:5. And it included the firstborn of even the cattle, the domestic animals of the Egyptians. This stroke awakened the Egyptians, and the entire land was filled with mourning. The Passover plague accomplished what the other 9 had not. That same night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and ordered them to leave Egypt along with all Israel and all their possessions. This was the divine prophecy fulfilled. The Egyptians were terrified. They insisted that Israel leave Egypt at once before the entire land was destroyed and all its people slain. Israel's departure from Egypt was exactly as God had promised. They borrowed everything they desired, and the Egyptians refused them nothing. Thus did Israel spoil Egypt. The land was devastated by the plagues. There was national mourning over the death of the firstborn. Then the Israelites stripped the Egyptians of their valuables. It was a blow from which Egypt never fully recovered. Egypt is still a third world country today. When God does a job, He does a thorough job of it, doesn't He? Jehovah placed 4 certain restrictions upon the annual observance of the Passover. These included, number 1, no foreigner could partake of the ordinance unless he first became a proselyte and submit to circumcision. Number 2, the ordinance must be observed by family units. You see that in verses 3 through 10. Number 3, no bone of the paschal lamb could be broken. And then number 4, the restrictions were the same for native-born Israelites as for Gentile proselytes. Now we go to Leviticus chapter 23. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them concerning the feasts of the Lord. Notice the word Lord in all caps. Which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocations, even these are my feasts. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th is the Sabbath of rest and holy convocation. Ye shall do no work therein. It is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings. These are the feasts of the Lord, even holy convocations, which ye shall proclaim in their seasons. And the 14th day of the first month at even, or at evening, going down of the sun, is the Lord's Passover. And the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread unto the Lord. 7 days ye must eat unleavened bread. In the first day ye shall have a holy convocation. Ye shall do no servile work therein, but ye shall offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord 7 days. And the 7th day is a holy convocation. Ye shall do no servile work therein. Now, why is this important, you say? Because we get down to the crucifixion of Jesus. It's very, very important, as we will see when we get to there. Feasts. Feast simply means an appointment meeting. The common concept of a feast is a bountiful, festive meal. This is not always the meaning of the term in Scripture. A meal may be served, but the primary meaning is that of an appointed time of meeting. Convocation means a calling together, an assembly, in this instance for religious purposes. All told, there were 7 holy convocations annually, in addition to the weekly Sabbath. The first and last days of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Pentecost, Yom Kippur, the Feast of Trumpets, and the first and last days of the Feast of Tabernacles. That's very important also, because a lack of understanding of the Sabbaths is what leads to the belief that Jesus was crucified on Friday. Sabbath means cessation, rest. The context determines if the Sabbath is the 7th day of the week or if it is some other special holy day. It could be either one. But how it's used in the verses within their context is how you would determine which it is. In this text, it is the 7th day, or the weekly Sabbath. It began at sunset on Friday, and it ended at sunset on Saturday. That's also very important. Keep in mind. All work was forbidden. This was Israel's most holy day. Its purpose, to commemorate the person and work of Israel's God. This is according to Genesis 2, 1 through 3, Exodus 16, verses 23 through 29, and Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11. Sabbath was to afford needed rest and refreshment, and to afford opportunity to reflect on His person and law. The first and last days of this observance were days of holy convocation. No servile work might be done on these days. Jesus was crucified. Now that should say Nisan 15, or 14 rather than 15. Well, in the notes, I changed it when I developed the slides, but in the notes it's 15, but it should be 14. Jesus was crucified on Nisan 14, the day, not after, but the day of the Paschal meal. You might want to change that in your notes. The note in John 18:28 regarding the Pharisees' reluctance to enter the judgment hall because of the Passover does not refer to the paschal lamb, but to the peace offering, which must be offered and eaten on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. A lack of understanding of these Sabbaths will cause you to wind up out in left field. Numbers 28, verses 19 through 24, lists the public sacrifices to be offered on each of the days of this week's festival. Deuteronomy 16:17 prescribes the peace offerings which might be offered at an individual's discretion. Nisan became the first month of the religious year. Yes, sir.
I hope I'm not getting ahead. It's interesting, as we just saw right here, Jesus crucified on Nisan 14. It was 4 days prior to that where he entered into Jerusalem as, I think, what was the term, that the lamb was to be observed 4 days before this.
Yes.
It's interesting. That's why these are so important, what we're saying.
That's the reason that we use this as a foundation, because that way it's easy to understand what happened during that week that Jesus was crucified. There were a lot of things happened, and all of it was important. And it's important to have an understanding of the original Passover in order to understand that week of the crucifixion.
And it's interesting that at the same time that the people were observing their lambs for Passover, Jerusalem would observe God's lamb.
That is correct.
It's interesting.
All right, Nisan became the first month of the religious year because this was the month of the first Passover in Egypt. Exodus 12, verses 2 through 15. Now, I didn't put these in the slides, and I encourage you to read these passages later on your own. Originally, the head of each household was responsible for the Passover rites. But with the establishment of the Aaronic priesthood, the priestly rights for the nation were vested in Aaron's sons, and sacrifices apart from the temple were forbidden. You see Deuteronomy 16, verses 5 and 6. Now, temple, and you can also substitute tabernacle. When the tabernacle was built and God gave the ordinances, then no longer was the head of the household responsible for conducting the Passover. The priest was. So we'll look about it. We'll see a little bit more in the next paragraph here. The head of each household must bring his Passover lamb to the tabernacle, or later to the temple, where the priest would offer the blood on the altar. The lamb was then taken away to be cooked in preparation for the paschal meal. Feast, in verse 4, is moed, the term used in verse 2. But in verse 6, it is chak, meaning festival or festive occasion. The Passover itself was 1 day only, the 14th of Nisan. the Feast of Unleavened Bread lasted 7 days, from Nisan 15 through 21. During this week, only unleavened bread was allowed to be eaten, according to Exodus 12:34. The two festivals are not the same, but they were observed together and were called indiscriminately the Feast of the Passover or the Feast of Unleavened Bread. According to traditional ritual, 3 men entered the barley field with basket and sickle immediately following sunset on Nisan 14. They harvested ears of the grain equal to about 3 pecks and 3 pints, and brought them to the altar of the tabernacle, or later the temple. The priest offered these ears of grain as a wave offering in token of the consecration of the entire barley harvest to Jehovah. Now, this was basically after the temple was erected. However, they continued to use the tabernacle for a long time after they entered into the land that God gave them. So, when the tabernacle was finally done away and the temple was built, then they would be brought to the temple rather than to the tabernacle. The priest offered these ears of grain as a wave offering in token of the consecration of the entire barley harvest to Jehovah. Along with the wave offering of grain, a burnt offering of a lamb, and a meat or food offering of double the usual quantity was offered, and a drink offering of wine. You find this in Leviticus 1, 10 through 13, and in chapter 2, 1 through 16. This was to be a perpetual ordinance for all Israel, no matter where they lived. And as I said, they still do it to this day, or at least the Orthodox do. Prior to the waving of the sheaf of barley, no bread made from the new flour, no parched grain, nor fresh grain was to be eaten. The lesson from this is that the first and the best belongs to God as a token of His ownership and man's stewardship. In our conclusion this evening, then we'll look at the charts for just a minute when we finish here. This lays the foundation for what was to come in the New Testament. The pattern is very important because it would determine when and how Jesus would be crucified. Now, I'd like for you to take the chart that I handed out. I put these together with a paper clip rather than stapling them together. And the reason is because they are designed to go end to end. Thus so. If you look on the first page, and I'm sorry I do not have a slide built into the program for this right now. Before this series is over, hopefully you will see this on the slide. You see that it was Nisan in 1491 BC. Now, anytime you have a biblical date, there can always be some questions. Okay? Because of the way our calculation goes and the way that it went then. So, there can be some questions as to, in other words, we don't want to be dogmatic on this is the exact year. Okay. You can't always do that unless it's stated in the Scriptures. And many times when it's stated in the Scriptures, secular history will bear it out to give you a date. All right? You find in the first line there was the beginning of months. On the 10th day is when the lamb was to be put up. And it was to be a male, 1 year old, and it was to be separated until the 14th. And at the 14th, it was to be slain, it was to be cooked, and it was to be eaten. Now, according to Deuteronomy 16:6, the day begins at sundown. All right? And they were not to leave their houses until morning. Now, at midnight was the death of the firstborn. You see down there in the left corner. Now you see this line going up straight on the end down here on the left side? That was the preparation day. 14th of Nisan went here. Down here is midnight. And then up. When it crosses this main line right here, that is the dawning of the 15th of Nisan. That was the preparation day. Beginning on the 15th of Nisan, on your second page, began the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It was a holy convocation. But in the original Passover, and this is what we're looking at more tonight, they traveled from Rameses to Succoth, approximately 25 miles. On the 16th, they traveled from Succoth to Etham, about 25 miles. And on the 17th, they traveled from Etham to the sea, approximately 25 miles. And on the 18th of Nisan, they crossed the sea. Now, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, with the establishment of the tabernacle and temple, went from the 15th of Nisan to the 21st of Nisan. The 15th was a high Sabbath, a holy convocation. It wasn't a Saturday. It wasn't the seventh day of the week. But it was a special Sabbath. It was the beginning of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And it went on until the 21st of Nisan, which is reflected on page number 3. It looks better when you put them all end to end. Any questions, comments? I realize it's a little bit technical, but it's important to understand this Old Testament Passover before we get into the New Testament. Yes?
It says that they ate nettles. Aren't nettles that we can touch?
No, this would be something else. No, here in the South, a nettle, no, sir. That's a weed that has a lot of stickers to it. But this was something totally different. It was apparently a vegetable. Okay. I didn't do research on it, but no, it wasn't what we would think of as a nettle. Okay. All right. So this begins the Passover series. Now, the way that I do the Passover series from this point on is more in a narrative form rather than in an outline form. Okay? But we will follow the steps of Jesus from Galilee down to Jerusalem. I could go all the way back, but have to start somewhere within a reasonable distance to be able to finish up later on. All right, any questions, comments before we dismiss? All right. Brother Bernie, would you dismiss us, please?